A 98-year-old black woman, frail in appearance but full of dignity, never imagined that a quiet evening at a public phone booth would turn into a nightmare. Two police officers, their eyes filled with suspicion and authority, accused her of loitering without any justification. Before she could explain, they handcuffed her, insulted her, and dragged her across the ground under the horrified gaze of bystanders. Just when it seemed the story would end in silent injustice, an extraordinary force intervened. That force was none other than the legendary Mike Tyson. What happened next will leave you speechless. Follow this story to witness how courage and kindness can turn the tide of injustice. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Your support inspires us to bring you more meaningful stories. Green Hill, a small and tranquil town nestled among lush green hills, was not a place where thrilling events typically unfolded. Mike Tyson, the boxing legend, was enjoying a short retreat here. He had chosen the town for its serenity, a quality he craved after years under the spotlight, battling not only in the ring but also in life. That afternoon, Mike was sitting in a small cafe, sipping tea and watching people pass by on the street. The golden sunlight filtered through the trees, bathing the town in a nostalgic glow. But something unusual caught his eye. Across the street, at an old public phone booth, a frail elderly woman was struggling. Eleanor Jackson, small and almost engulfed by her thick coat, was trying to make a call. Her trembling hands clutched the receiver, her eyes shining with determination. Mike noticed she had been there for quite a while. She inserted a coin, dialed, then hung up, repeating the process. She seemed desperate to reach someone but couldn't. There was something about her, the urgency and stubbornness despite her frail body, that made it impossible for Mike to look away. When a white and blue patrol car slowly pulled up near the phone booth, Mike felt a twinge of unease. A young police officer, Jack Carter, stepped out. With a stern expression, he approached Eleanor. He said something, but the elderly woman simply shook her head, continuing to feed coins into the outdated machine. Mike sat up straight. He watched through the cafe window, his attention fully fixed on the unfolding scene. Jack, appearing to lose patience, stepped closer, placing a hand on Eleanor's arm and speaking louder. Eleanor turned, her sharp gaze piercing through Jack's composure. Though her voice was hoarse and soft, her words rang clear enough that even Mike, sitting from afar, could hear them. "You will regret this." The tension in the air thickened as Jack decided to cuff Eleanor. Mike sprang to his feet. He couldn't believe his eyes. A nearly 100-year-old woman, frail and trembling, was being treated like a criminal. He knew he had to act. As Jack prepared to escort Eleanor to the patrol car, Mike quickly strode over, his footsteps echoing loudly on the pavement. With his towering frame, broad shoulders, and commanding presence, he positioned himself as a human barrier between Eleanor and Jack. "Hold on a second, officer," Mike said, his voice deep and firm. Jack looked up, blinking in recognition as he realized who stood before him. It was Mike Tyson, a name and face no one could fail to recognize. "What do you want, sir?" Jack asked, his tone slightly restrained. Mike crossed his arms over his chest, locking eyes with Jack. "I want to know why this woman is being arrested. What are you doing? She's nearly 100 years old. What could she possibly have done to warrant handcuffs?" Jack, momentarily hesitant, tried to maintain his composure. "She's been here for over an hour. Her behavior's suspicious. I'm just following procedure." Mike frowned. He could sense the officer's resolve, but he also recognized the lack of clear judgment in his actions. Turning to Eleanor, Mike saw her silent but pleading eyes. "Procedure is one thing," Mike replied, his tone growing sharper. "But don't you think you should have asked what she needed before slapping handcuffs on her? She doesn't deserve to be treated like this." Eleanor's voice finally broke through the tension, quiet yet resolute. "I just needed to make a phone call, but no one seems to understand that." Jack tried to hold his ground, but the combined presence of Mike and Eleanor's words made him waver. Reluctantly, he loosened the handcuffs and said to Mike, "If you want to help her, come to the station. You can prove she's not a threat." Mike nodded, but he felt this wasn't just about an elderly woman and a police officer. Something bigger was hidden behind Eleanor's determined eyes, and Mike was resolved to uncover the truth. Mike walked behind Jack Carter's patrol car, his long strides cutting across the sidewalk, a steadfast shadow standing guard over Mrs. Eleanor. The elderly woman was placed gently in the back seat, her frail hands loosely cuffed in front of her, yet her eyes never left Mike. It wasn't a gaze of desperation or gratitude. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done, but no longer had the strength to do it alone. Jack Carter glanced into the rearview mirror, noticing Mike's unwavering presence behind the car. Pulling up to the station, Jack intended to lead Mrs. Eleanor inside when the sound of Mike's deliberate footsteps echoed behind him. "I'm coming in with you," Mike stated firmly, not waiting for an invitation. Jack frowned, but found himself unable to deny the imposing man's request. With a shrug, he turned to face Mike. "If you're here to provide a statement or support the lady, fine, but don't interfere with the process." Mike gave a single nod, his silence speaking volumes. He stepped through the precinct's doors and was immediately struck by the familiar coldness of places like these. Bright fluorescent lighting, the mechanical hum of equipment, and the heavy quiet punctuated by the curious stares of officers. Jack guided Mrs. Eleanor to a metal chair near the front desk and then turned to Mike. "I've got paperwork to handle. If you want to talk to her, do it quickly. But remember, this isn't the place for drama." Mike crouched down, his broad shoulders nearly level with the frail woman seated before him. Neither spoke at first, but the air between them was charged with unspoken weight. Her thin, cuffed hands rested neatly on her lap, but her eyes, deep, sharp, and resolute, betrayed a strength untouched by age. "Ma'am," Mike began, his voice softer than usual, "my name is Mike Tyson. I saw you needed help. Can you tell me what's going on?" Mrs. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, searching his expression as though weighing the worth of his offer. At last, she gave a small nod, her fragile shoulders sagging slightly, as if the burden she carried had found a temporary reprieve. "Mike," she said, her voice raspy but clear, "you've been in the ring before, haven't you?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "You know what it's like to fight for yourself, don't you?" Mike froze momentarily at the question. Memories of grueling matches, both in the ring and in life, flashed through his mind. He nodded, his gaze softening. "Then you'll understand me. I'm fighting, but not for myself. For those who can't fight for themselves." Mrs. Eleanor paused, a faint cough shaking her frame before she continued. "I've been trying to reach my son, Nathaniel Jackson. He's a good lawyer, but he's not strong enough to stand alone against the people we're up against. Have you heard of the Baxter family?" Mike shook his head, though he could feel the tension behind her words. "The Baxters are manipulators. controlling this entire town from the shadows. They're rich, powerful, and they'll do anything to keep their secrets buried. In 1982, a mining collapse killed dozens of poor workers. The Baxters, the ones at the top, covered it all up, bribing police, silencing witnesses, making anyone who spoke out disappear. Mike's jaw tightened, his fists curling instinctively, but he remained silent, letting her continue. I'm one of the few who know the full truth. I lost friends, colleagues in that collapse. I was a teacher back then, but I gave up everything to seek justice. Now, I'm old and weak, but I can't let this secret die with me. Nathaniel is my only hope, but I can't reach him. Her eyes locked onto Mike's, pleading. Mike, can you help me? I can't fight this alone anymore. Mike studied Mrs. Eleanor for what felt like an eternity. He could see that this wasn't a simple plea. It was a desperate call for someone to carry the torch of truth when her own strength was failing. I'll help you, Mike said firmly, his voice steady and resolute. I don't know who the Baxters are, but you don't have to fight them alone anymore. Mike Tyson stepped out of the police station's intake room, his steps heavy. Eleanor Jackson's story had planted an indescribable feeling in him. It wasn't just indignation. It was a profound compassion for a small, nearly forgotten woman navigating a world riddled with injustices. As he glanced back through the glass window, he saw Eleanor still sitting there, her frail frame almost swallowed by the metal chair. Yet, in her eyes burned a spark that Mike had only ever witnessed in the ring, a steadfast determination and an unyielding resolve. Officer Jack Carter returned, a file in hand, his expression tinged with unease. It was evident that Mike's presence, a boxing legend, had turned what was initially a mundane, loitering incident into something far more significant. Listen, Jack began, his tone softer than before. I'm just following protocol. But if you really want to help her, you should reach out to her son. I looked up Nathaniel Jackson in the records. He's a well-known attorney in New York. Looks like the old lady wasn't lying. Mike nodded, a sense of relief flickering across his face. He pulled out his phone, entering the number Eleanor had desperately tried calling earlier. Let me give it a shot, Mike said. Jack stood by, watching as Mike dialed. The phone rang twice before a deep, clear male voice answered on the other end. Hello? This is Nathaniel Jackson. Who's calling? Mike didn't reply immediately. He glanced back at Eleanor through the glass before speaking calmly. Hello, Mr. Jackson. This is Mike Tyson. I'm at the Green Hill Police Station with your mother, Eleanor Jackson. There was a moment of dead silence. My mother? Nathaniel repeated, his voice tense. Is she all right? Why is she at the police station? Mike gave a succinct explanation. Eleanor had been detained for suspicious activity at a public phone booth while trying to contact him for help. He emphasized that she had mentioned secrets about the Baxter family, something Nathaniel appeared to recognize. Nathaniel took a deep breath. Mr. Tyson, I'm on my way. Please keep my mother safe. And if possible, don't let anyone else know about this. The Baxters aren't people you want to cross. Mike ended the call and turned to Jack. Her son is on his way. I think we'll learn more when he gets here. 2 hours later, as darkness enveloped Green Hill, a sleek black car pulled up outside the station. A tall, impeccably dressed man in a deep navy suit stepped out. It was Nathaniel Jackson. Despite his polished appearance, the fatigue on his face was unmistakable. Nathaniel nearly stormed into the station, his worried eyes scanning the room until they landed on his mother. "Mom?" he called, his voice trembling slightly. Eleanor turned her head, a hint of relief crossing her face. "Nathaniel, you finally came." Nathaniel hurried to her side, kneeling and taking her hands. "Are you all right, Mom? Why are you here?" Eleanor smiled faintly, but her tone grew serious. "I'm fine. But now, perhaps you understand why I had to reach you by any means necessary. We don't have much time, Nathaniel." Nathaniel squeezed her hands gently before turning to Mike and Jack. "Thank you, Mr. Tyson, for helping my mother. Without you, I don't know what might have happened." Mike shook his head, his expression calm. "She doesn't need thanks. She needs justice." Nathaniel sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. "So, how much has my mother told you?" "Just enough for me to understand that this is bigger than a loitering charge," Mike replied. "Who are the Baxters, and why would your mother risk so much to find you?" Nathaniel bit his lip, tension and anger flashing in his eyes. He pulled a chair closer, sitting beside his mother, and began to explain. "The Baxter family is one of the most powerful families around here. They control everything: mines, factories, even the local financial sector. But their power doesn't come from integrity. They manipulate everything: politics, the police, even the courts. Back in 1982, there was a mine collapse at their main site. Over 50 workers died, but instead of taking responsibility, they covered it all up." Nathaniel glanced at his mother, his eyes filled with a mixture of respect and pain. "My mom, she was one of the few who dared to speak out. She witnessed things that no one else had the courage to confront. But when she tried to expose them, the Baxters used every tool at their disposal to silence her. They destroyed our family, forced us to leave Green Hill, and subjected her to decades of surveillance and threats." Mike listened intently, absorbing every word. He could feel Nathaniel's pain and helplessness, but he also recognized an extraordinary strength in Eleanor, a nearly 100-year-old woman who refused to abandon the fight for justice. "My mother kept a journal," Nathaniel continued. "Inside it are all the details of what the Baxters did. But that's also why I'm scared for her. If they find out she still has it, they'll stop at nothing to get it back, even if—" Nathaniel's voice trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. Eleanor broke the silence, her voice weary but resolute. "We can't keep running. Nathaniel, you've grown strong. Now it's time to face the truth." Nathaniel squeezed her hand once more before looking at Mike, his expression grave. "Mr. Tyson, are you ready for what's coming? Because if we choose to fight this battle, there's no turning back." Mike didn't hesitate. He nodded, his eyes steely with the same focus he had when stepping into the ring. "I've fought many battles in my life, but this might be the most important one yet. I'm here to help your mother." The sky had not yet fully brightened when Mike Tyson stepped out of the hotel room, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The city of Green Hill was cloaked in silence, with only the dim glow of a few street lights and the soft hum of crickets breaking the stillness. Inside, Nathaniel Jackson was poring over the pages of his mother's journal, while Eleanor rested in an armchair, a thin blanket draped over her frail legs. The old journal, with its yellowed pages, was filled with shaky but sharp handwriting. Each entry was a piece of a grim puzzle: witness testimonies, threatening letters, and details of the bribes the Baxter family had used to silence authorities. Nathaniel sighed, looking up at Mike as he re-entered the room. "I can't believe my mother kept all of this for so many years. Even just a fraction of this journal could bring down the entire Baxter family." Mike nodded, his gaze as sharp as ever. Exactly. But do you realize something? If we have this, they want it too, and they'll stop at nothing to keep us from exposing it. Nathaniel sat in silence, but the determination in his eyes showed he understood the gravity of Mike's words. That morning, Nathaniel decided to take part of the evidence from the journal to a trusted colleague in a nearby city. He believed that only with help from someone inside the legal system could they bring the truth to light. "Mike, I have to meet this guy. He's a college friend of mine. If anyone has the guts to stand up to the Baxters, it's him." Mike didn't argue, but insisted Nathaniel wouldn't go alone. "I'm coming with you. If the Baxters know what we're up to, they won't just sit back and watch." Nathaniel agreed. Before they left, he instructed Jack, who had been stationed outside the hotel to monitor any suspicious activity, to stay and protect Eleanor. "If anything happens, call me immediately," Nathaniel said. Jack nodded firmly. "Don't worry, I won't let anyone get near her." Mike and Nathaniel's car rolled down the road leading out of Green Hill. Everything seemed peaceful, but Mike kept his eyes glued to the rearview mirror. He noticed a black car maintaining a fixed distance behind them. "Nathaniel," Mike said, his voice dropping, "does anyone else know where we're headed?" Nathaniel looked startled. "No, just Jack and my mom. Why do you ask?" Mike didn't answer immediately, glancing at the rearview mirror again. The black car suddenly accelerated, closing the gap between the two vehicles. Mike's heart sank. "We've got trouble," he said, gripping the wheel tighter. Before he could explain, the black car surged forward, attempting to force their vehicle off the road. Nathaniel panicked. "What the hell is going on?" Mike gritted his teeth, expertly maneuvering the car to avoid the collision. "They don't want us to make it to our destination. Hold on, Nathaniel." The black car continued its aggressive pursuit, trying to drive them off the road. Mike, with reflexes honed from years of training and fighting, kept control of the car, but he knew they couldn't keep this up for long. Suddenly, a sharp curve appeared ahead. Mike hit the gas, ignoring Nathaniel's worried shouts beside him. Their car sped through the curve at a breakneck pace, but Mike's daring maneuver left the black car unable to adjust in time. It skidded off the road and crashed into a large tree on the roadside. Mike didn't slow down until they were a mile away from the scene. Only then did he stop, both of them gasping for breath. "Who were they?" Nathaniel asked, his voice shaking with fear and anger. Mike looked at him, his eyes cold. "Baxter's men. They know what we're carrying." When they arrived at the meeting place with Nathaniel's colleague, they didn't get out of the car immediately. Mike scanned the parking lot, his eyes scrutinizing every shadow and corner. "We can't let our guard down. If they tracked us from Green Hill, they might already be here." Nathaniel nodded, his face tight with worry. "I messaged my friend. He's waiting in his office. Let's get in and out quickly." Inside the building, Nathaniel's colleague, Lucas Harper, a well-known lawyer respected for his integrity, was waiting. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, Lucas shook hands with Nathaniel and Mike, his expression grave as he examined the documents. "My God," Lucas said, flipping through the pages. This is undeniable evidence. But Nathaniel, you have to understand. If what you're saying is true, we're not just up against a wealthy family. We're up against an entire system they've been controlling for decades." Nathaniel bit his lip, his voice resolute. "I know, but my mother kept these for her entire life, and I can't let them be forgotten. Lucas, I need your help." Lucas nodded. "I'll do everything I can, but you need to promise me one thing, Nathaniel." "What's that?" Lucas looked him straight in the eye. "Be prepared to pay the price. People like the Baxters won't go down without a fight." As Mike and Nathaniel left Lucas's office, Nathaniel's phone suddenly rang. It was Jack Carter, but his voice was far from calm. "Nathaniel, you need to get back here. Something's happened at the hotel. Your mom." Mike Tyson slammed the accelerator, and the car roared down the narrow asphalt road toward Green Hill. The fading light of day surrendered to the creeping chill of nightfall, cloaking everything in darkness. Nathaniel sat beside him, his hands trembling as he gripped his phone tightly. Jack hadn't explained what had happened, but the panic in his voice during the call was enough to unsettle Nathaniel. "Mike, what do you think's going on?" Nathaniel asked, his voice a mix of fear and anger. Mike's eyes stayed locked on the road ahead. "I don't know, but it's clear the Baxter family is making their move. They know what we're holding on to, and they want to silence the old woman before things spiral out of their control." Nathaniel bit his lip, worry etched into his face. He knew his mother's actions over the years had been courageous, but they had also been incredibly risky. If the Baxters were willing to ambush them on the road, they wouldn't hesitate to target her directly. When they arrived at the hotel, the scene before them made both men freeze. Jack's patrol car was parked askew on the roadside, its emergency lights still flashing. A hotel window had been shattered, with shards of glass strewn across the ground. Inside, the flickering chandelier cast eerie reflections through the broken panes, amplifying the chaos and fear. Mike and Nathaniel rushed inside. The hotel hallway was eerily empty, but the air was thick with danger. A young hotel clerk stood trembling at the front desk, his face pale as he watched the two men approach. "What happened here?" Mike demanded, his voice cold and commanding. The clerk stammered. I don't know. Some men came in, and then I just heard the glass shatter and screaming. They took the old lady." Nathaniel felt as though a knife had been plunged into his chest. "Where's my mother? Where did they take her?" The clerk pointed toward the back door, which led to the parking lot. Mike said nothing, pulling Nathaniel along. In the lot, they found Jack Carter slumped against a wall, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Jack!" Nathaniel shouted, rushing to help him. "What happened? Where's my mother?" Jack struggled to open his eyes, his voice raspy. They stormed in out of nowhere. Two of them smashed the window, another held me at gunpoint. I tried to fight, but they had guns. They took Eleanor, shoved her into a black van, and sped off. Mike clenched his fists, his eyes burning with fury. "Did you catch a license plate?" Jack shook his head. "No, but I saw a logo on the van. It was from Baxter Industries." Nathaniel's blood boiled. They dared to kidnap my mother in broad daylight? Mike placed a firm hand on Nathaniel's shoulder, his gaze steady. "Calm down, Nathaniel. If they've kept her alive, it means they want leverage. They know she's valuable to us. That means we still have time to act." As Nathaniel and Mike returned to the hotel to strategize, Nathaniel's phone rang. He glanced at the screen to see an unknown number. Without hesitation, he answered. "Jackson, I hope you're ready to listen," a deep, cold voice said on the other end. "Who are you?" Nathaniel growled. "We represent the interests of the Baxter family, and your mother, Eleanor Jackson, is in our custody. If you want her to live, You'll do exactly as we say." Nathaniel gripped the phone tighter, his entire body trembling with rage. "What do you want?" "By sunset tomorrow, you'll bring all the documents you have to the old warehouse by the South River bank. No police, no one else. If we see even a hint of betrayal, you'll never see your mother again." The call ended before Nathaniel could respond. He threw the phone onto the table, his face contorted with pain and fury. "They want all the documents," Nathaniel said, his voice hoarse, "and they want me to go alone." Mike stood up, his eyes flashing with resolve. "You can't go alone. They won't let you walk away, even if you give them what they want. This is how they erase loose ends." Nathaniel looked at Mike, torn. "But I can't let them hurt my mother. What am I supposed to do?" Mike stepped closer, gripping his shoulder. "We'll do it, but not on their terms. I've got a plan." That night, Mike, Nathaniel, and Jack huddled together to prepare. Despite his injuries, Jack insisted on helping. "I owe Eleanor. I won't let her be harmed again." Mike outlined a strategy, drawing on his years of experience handling high-stakes situations. "Nathaniel will take a fake set of documents. We'll plant a tracker on his car so Jack and I can follow from a safe distance. If they try anything, we'll strike immediately." Nathaniel looked at Mike, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Do you really think this will work?" Mike smirked slightly, but his expression carried both determination and a hint of danger. "I've faced tougher battles than this. Trust me, I won't let them win." As the night wore on, the group made their preparations. Mike meticulously checked every piece of equipment: trackers, communication devices, and backup tools. Jack, despite his pain, remained steadfast. Nathaniel, though racked with worry for his mother, began to trust in Mike's plan. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the chill of an impending showdown. Mike stood by the window, staring into the thick darkness beyond, where unseen threats awaited. "Tomorrow night," Mike muttered, as if reminding himself, "we'll get her back, and the Baxters will pay for what they've done." In the room, Nathaniel nodded silently. That night, none of them would sleep, each prepared for the fight of their lives, not just for justice, but for the survival of those they loved. Dusk fell, and the last rays of sunlight faded, giving way to the thick darkness enveloping the town of Greenhill. Mike Tyson and Jack Carter sat in their car, watching the tracker signal from Nathaniel Jackson's vehicle on a small screen. The glowing dot on the map crept steadily toward the old Riverside warehouse. Neither of them spoke, but the heavy silence in the car felt like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. Nathaniel sat in a small van, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. On the seat beside him lay a bag containing fake dossiers, meticulously prepared to deceive their enemies. He glanced at the rearview mirror, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The dim glow of distant streetlights did little to dispel the darkness invading his mind. All he could do now was trust Mike's plan. As Nathaniel neared the warehouse, its silhouette loomed faintly against the night sky. Dim, aging yellow lights hung from the ceiling, casting an eerie glow over the entrance. A black van was parked by the doorway, surrounded by 4 men dressed in black, their cold and dangerous demeanor unmistakable. They stood silently, their sharp eyes fixed on the approaching vehicle. Nathaniel brought the van to a stop and, summoning all his courage, stepped out. His grip tightened on the bag's handle as his eyes flickered toward the men waiting for him. From the group, a tall man stepped forward. His face was expressionless, but his calculating gaze made Nathaniel feel utterly exposed. "You brought the files?" the man asked, his voice low and cutting. Nathaniel nodded, striving to keep his voice steady. "I did what you asked. Where's my mother?" The man smirked, his eyes mocking. "Eleanor is safe for now, but before we hand her over, we need to confirm that what you brought us is what we're looking for." Nathaniel said nothing, slowly opening the bag to reveal the fake dossiers. The man gestured to one of his subordinates, who stepped forward to inspect them. As the files were flipped through, Nathaniel felt the tension in the air. He knew that even the slightest mistake could bring everything crashing down. "My mother," Nathaniel repeated, his tone firmer. The tall man signaled to another subordinate, who opened the van's rear doors. Inside, Eleanor Jackson sat slumped against the seat, her hands bound but otherwise unharmed. Her weary eyes lit up with a faint glimmer of hope when they met Nathaniel's. "Mom!" Nathaniel shouted, moving toward her, but a gun was immediately raised and aimed at him by one of the guards. "Not so fast, Jackson," the tall man said coldly. "There are still matters we need to discuss." Nathaniel froze, but his gaze never left his mother. He knew he needed to buy time, just enough for Mike and Jack to act. Not far away, Mike and Jack were stealthily closing in. Mike took the lead, moving silently through the shadows surrounding the warehouse. Years of experience in dangerous situations had made him an expert at blending into the darkness like a predator. Jack followed, his handgun at the ready. Through binoculars, Mike surveyed the scene at the warehouse entrance. He noted every critical detail, the guards' positions, their movements, and, most importantly, where Eleanor was being held. His eyes were sharp as he turned to Jack. "We need to move quickly and cleanly. If they catch on, they won't hesitate to kill everyone." Jack nodded. "You handle the ones outside. I'll deal with anyone threatening Nathaniel." Mike didn't reply, given only a brief nod before vanishing into the shadows. Back at the negotiation site, the tension escalated. Nathaniel could sense the enemy's growing suspicion. The tall man stared at him as if trying to see through his facade. "You know, Jackson," the man sneered, "even if you do everything we ask, your family will never truly be safe. Baxter doesn't just want these files, they want you gone." Nathaniel met his gaze, defiance burning in his eyes. "You think you can control everything forever? There will come a time when justice catches up to you." The man laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Justice? Do you really believe the law can touch us? That's naive, Jackson." A loud noise suddenly shattered the night. Two of the guards outside were taken down in an instant. A shadow moved swiftly, and before anyone could react, Mike emerged, dropping another guard with a powerful blow. "This ends here," Mike declared, his voice thunderous, freezing Baxter's men in place. Nathaniel seized the moment, sprinting to the van and quickly untying his mother. "Mom, it's me. We're getting out of here." Eleanor looked at her son, tears glistening in her eyes but her expression brimming with pride. "You did it, Nathaniel. You're so brave." Meanwhile, the remaining guards scrambled to draw their weapons, but Jack intervened in time. With Mike's support, they efficiently neutralized every threat without spilling more blood than necessary. As the confrontation ended, a heavy silence settled, broken only by the sound of wind rustling through the warehouse's iron doors. Nathaniel guided his mother outside, tears streaming down his face as he felt her warmth. Mike stood nearby, his expression still serious but tinged with relief. "We got her out," Jack said, wiping sweat from his brow. "But the hardest part is still ahead. We have to ensure those behind this pay the price." Mike nodded. "We'll make it happen. This is only the beginning." Nathaniel turned to Mike, his voice filled with gratitude. "You saved my mother's life. I don't know how to thank you." Mike placed a hand on his shoulder. "Use what you have to bring the Baxter family to justice. That's the best way you can thank me." In the dim glow of the streetlights, the group stood for a moment, breathing in the weight of their first victory. But deep down, they all knew the real fight was far from over. The road ahead would be fraught with danger, yet they were ready to face it, because now they weren't just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for the truth and for justice. Nathaniel helped his mother out of the warehouse where a perilous encounter had just taken place. Eleanor Jackson, though frail in body, radiated an extraordinary resilience. Each step she took seemed to echo the message that the truth must be upheld, no matter the cost. Mike Tyson followed closely behind, his sharp gaze scanning the darkness to ensure no threats lingered. Nathaniel's small truck awaited them in an open field not far from the warehouse. Mike and Jack quickly checked the vehicle, installing a tracking device to guard against potential surveillance. Nathaniel assisted his mother into the back seat, gently draping a blanket over her shoulders before turning to Mike. "What's our next move?" he asked, his voice low but determined. Mike leaned on the car door, his expression serious. "We can't sit back and wait for them to strike again. The Baxter family has both the money and the power to keep covering this up. If we want the truth to come out, we need to act now, before they retaliate." Jack nodded, his face still tense from the recent confrontation. "We need to find a way to expose this evidence without giving them a chance to interfere. But the question is, who can help us? Who's willing to stand up to the Baxters?" From the back seat, Eleanor spoke up, her voice weak but resolute. "We don't need someone willing. We need someone with the integrity to do what's right, and I know just the person." Nathaniel turned to his mother, hope flickering in his eyes. "Who are you talking about?" Eleanor offered a tired smile. "Judge Amelia Hart. She's one of the few people I know who has kept her integrity in this corrupt system. She once turned down a bribe from the Baxters, even though it nearly cost her career." Mike glanced at Nathaniel. "If she's really the person you say she is, we need to reach her right away. But how can we make sure the Baxters don't find out?" Jack spoke up immediately. "Amelia Hart lives in a suburb a few hours from here. I know the way. We can leave tonight." Nathaniel agreed, though worry lingered in his expression. "What about my mother? I don't want her to face any more danger." Mike turned to Eleanor, his gaze softening. "She'll come with us. If she trusts Judge Hart, her presence will lend weight to our words." The truck rumbled to life, pulling away from the warehouse and heading toward the suburbs. The road stretched ahead, quiet and empty, illuminated only by the truck's headlights. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension. Nathaniel glanced in the rearview mirror to see his mother resting her eyes, her face more serene than it had been hours ago. He wondered how such a small, fragile woman had carried such a colossal secret for so many years. Mike, sitting in the passenger seat, turned to Jack. "Are you sure Hart will believe us? I don't want to waste time convincing someone while the Baxters are breathing down our necks." Jack shrugged. "I've worked with her on cases before. Amelia isn't easily intimidated by threats or bribes. If we bring her solid evidence, she'll act." Mike nodded, his focus returning to the road ahead. "Let's hope you're right." Near dawn, they arrived at Judge Amelia Hart's modest home, nestled deep in a sparse forest. The house was surrounded by an old wooden fence, and the faint glow from the windows suggested the judge was still awake. Jack stepped out of the truck first, knocking lightly on the wooden door. A moment later, the door creaked open to reveal a middle-aged woman with a sharp, resolute demeanor. "Jack Carter," she said, her keen eyes narrowing. "I wasn't expecting to see you at this hour." Jack gestured toward the truck. "Judge Hart, we need your help. This is about the Baxters, and we have the evidence to bring them down." Amelia Hart frowned slightly but didn't turn them away. "Come in." The group entered her small but tidy living room. Nathaniel placed a file bag on the table, opening it to reveal pages of his mother's meticulous journal. Mike and Jack watched as Judge Hart examined the documents, her expression growing graver with each passing page. "My God," she murmured, looking up at Eleanor. "You've kept all of this for how long?" "Nearly 4 decades, Eleanor replied, her voice soft but unwavering. "I've stayed silent long enough. It's time to let the truth come out." Amelia took a deep breath, her eyes hardening with resolve. "What you've brought me is more than enough to topple the Baxters, but this will be dangerous. They won't sit idly by." Mike stepped forward, his voice steady and firm. "We're not expecting this to be easy, but are you willing to stand with the truth?" Amelia studied him for a long moment before giving a decisive nod. "I'll do it, but we must act quickly before the Baxters have a chance to retaliate." The judge suggested reaching out to independent journalists and trustworthy colleagues in the legal field. Their plan was to release the evidence publicly through major media outlets while simultaneously forwarding it to federal investigative agencies to prevent interference from the Baxters. Meanwhile, Nathaniel, Mike, and Jack decided to stay in the area to protect Eleanor and Amelia. They all understood the Baxters wouldn't let this go without a fight. "We need to be ready," Mike said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "If they come for us, we'll face them. This time, no one dies." As the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, the group prepared for the challenges ahead. While Amelia drafted letters to her trusted contacts and Nathaniel double-checked the documents, Mike stood outside, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. A cold breeze swept past, carrying with it the ominous sense that the greatest battle was yet to come. But no matter what lay ahead, they wouldn't turn back. The truth was waiting to be freed, and they would be the ones to deliver it. The sky gradually shifted to shades of orange and gold as the first rays of dawn pierced through the treetops. At Judge Amelia Hart's small home, everyone was on high alert. Inside the living room, Amelia's desk was cluttered with papers, copies of documents, and recording devices. On a chair, Mrs. Eleanor Jackson sat quietly, her gaze distant as if lost in a painful memory, yet tinged with the calm of someone ready to face whatever lay ahead. Mike Tyson walked in through the front door, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "Is everything ready?" he asked, his deep voice commanding attention. Nathaniel, sitting beside his mother, nodded. "I've sent copies of all the documents to 3 independent journalists that Amelia recommended. They've promised to publish the truth, no matter what pressure Baxter brings." Amelia rose from her desk, holding a neatly sealed folder in her hands. I've also filed a request to reopen the investigation into the 1982 mine collapse. We've sent enough evidence to the federal authorities to force Baxter to face justice. Jack Carter stepped forward, checking his holstered gun one last time. But we need to prepare for the worst. Baxter's not the type to sit quietly when cornered. Mike smirked, a fearless glint in his eye. If they're coming, I'll be ready. As expected, the Baxter family didn't take long to discover their plans. Near midday, the distant hum of engines grew louder. From the window, Mike saw 3 black SUVs speeding toward the house, kicking up clouds of dust. A group of armed men disembarked, their faces cold and resolute. Mike turned to the group. They're here. Jack, protect Amelia and Mrs. Jackson. I'll hold them off. Jack nodded and quickly escorted Eleanor and Amelia to the safe room in the back. Nathaniel, instead of retreating, stood firm beside Mike. I'm not running. This fight is mine as much as it is yours. Mike didn't argue. He knew Nathaniel's spirit, unyielding in the face of injustice. The front door shook under a heavy bang, followed by a voice calling out, Jackson, we know you're in there. Come out now, or don't blame us for what happens next. Mike stood at the door, his face steely. If you want something, come in and take it, he replied, his voice thunderous, shaking the room. The door burst open, and the battle began. Mike launched forward with incredible speed and strength, taking down the first 2 attackers with a few powerful punches. Nathaniel, though lacking Mike's combat prowess, managed to grapple with one of the assailants from behind, while Jack provided cover fire from the safe room, forcing the rest of the attackers to retreat. The skirmish didn't last long. With his skills and experience, Mike quickly took control of the situation. Eventually, the attackers were subdued, sprawled across the ground. But no one relaxed, knowing this was only the beginning. That afternoon, the first articles exposing the Baxter family were published. Photos, documents, and excerpts from Eleanor's diary appeared across major news outlets and independent platforms. The story of the Baxters' corruption and crimes spread like wildfire. The consequences came faster than expected. Public pressure forced authorities to act swiftly. Warrants were issued, and the Baxters' key members were brought into custody. The investigation into the 1982 mine collapse was reopened, revealing the truth about the workers who perished and the evidence that had been buried. Amelia Hart, with her integrity and courage, played a pivotal role in steering the case. In a speech to the media, she highlighted not only Eleanor's sacrifices, but also the urgent need for systemic reforms where power and money could no longer overshadow justice. A month later, the group gathered at Amelia's house. Though the case was still ongoing, they knew they had achieved the most crucial victory, bringing the truth to light. Nathaniel sat beside his mother, his face beaming. "Mom, it's finally over. Justice has been served." Eleanor smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "No, my son, this isn't the end. This is the beginning of a new era where people like you must continue fighting to protect the truth." Mike stood near the window, gazing outside. He felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. "She's right," he said, turning to the group. "Truth isn't just the light we seek. It's the path we must walk." Jack, sitting across the room, laughed heartily. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this, but I'm proud to have stood with all of you." Outside, the sunset bathed the world in a golden glow, as if blessing those who dared to fight for justice. In that moment, they all understood their journey wasn't just about uncovering a hidden truth. It was about creating a fairer world where power could no longer trample lives. They had won, not with violence or power, but with courage and faith in the truth. From here, the light of justice would continue to spread, piercing the darkness that had shrouded Greenhill for decades. This story reminds us that truth, though buried, always awaits liberation by the brave. Justice isn't a given. It's the result of perseverance, unity, and belief in what's right. Let's spread the message of truth and justice by subscribing to the channel to follow more meaningful stories. Your support is a step toward inspiring change and building a fairer world. Thank you for being with us.